Mark's kitchen faucet ran dry. No water, no warning, just silence where life should flow. His pregnant wife and toddler left helpless, while the city's cold bureaucracy watched without mercy. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Mark Thompson stood frozen in the kitchen, the silence pressing on him heavier than any battlefield quiet he'd endured overseas. The sink was bone dry, the familiar tap, once a steady source of life, now rendered useless. His fingers trembled as he turned the handle again, desperate for a drop, any drop. The reality slammed into him with brutal clarity. The city council had cut off his water. No warning, no letter, no phone call, just silence and a cruel, unyielding cutoff. The house that was supposed to be a sanctuary, a quiet refuge from years of war, felt alien now. The air was stale, thick with the unspoken tension of a family suddenly deprived of something so basic, so vital. His wife, Jessica, had stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with disbelief, clutching their two young children close. The youngest, Emma, had started crying, confused why she couldn't wash her hands or drink a glass of water before bed. Mark's anger burned low but fierce beneath his calm exterior. Every muscle in his body screamed against the injustice. He thought of the sacrifices he'd made, the tours of duty where water was rationed, where he had faced dangers far worse than an uncaring bureaucracy. He thought of his fellow soldiers, some lost, some still struggling to come home, and now he himself was punished by a system that should have honored him. Behind this cutoff was Mayor Linda Greer, a woman he'd once supported. She was under immense pressure to balance the city's tight budget, a city grappling with dwindling resources and rising costs. Greer's office had made a call to enforce every rule without exception. No special treatment for anyone. The city council, caught in the gears of financial survival, had convinced themselves that fairness was blind and impartial enforcement, regardless of circumstance. To them, Mark was just another delinquent account on the books, a number to be corrected. But Mark wasn't a number. He was a man who had worn the uniform, who had faced down threats no city council member could imagine. And now, the very people who were supposed to serve the community had left his family high and dry. Literally. The bureaucratic tangle was dense, a minor municipal fee, unpaid due to a mix-up with paperwork and conflicting deadlines. A simple error, yet treated as a declaration of guilt. The council's rigid policies allowed no room for discretion, no space for empathy. Mark had tried calling the city office earlier that week, leaving messages that went unanswered. He had sent emails, each met with automated replies citing regulations and penalties, never once addressing his situation personally. Standing in his kitchen, Mark clenched his fists. The cold tap was a stark reminder of a deeper, systemic failure. A failure to recognize the humanity behind the numbers and policies. He thought of the families in his neighborhood, some struggling, some indifferent, but he felt singled out, humiliated by the very system he had served. Jessica's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Mark, what are we going to do?" Her worry was palpable, her strength cracking under the strain. Mark swallowed hard, forcing his voice steady. "We'll fix this. I'm not letting this stand." As night deepened, Mark paced the empty rooms, each footstep echoing his mounting frustration. The silence of the house, once peaceful, now felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. He knew this wasn't just about water. It was about respect, dignity, and the promise a nation makes to those who serve. Outside, the city council chambers buzzed with mundane debates and budget votes, unaware or indifferent to the silent crisis unfolding just blocks away. Mayor Greer, in her polished office, reviewed spreadsheets and mandates, convinced she was doing what was necessary. But Mark Thompson knew better. This was a battle for more than just water. It was a battle for justice, for recognition, for the simple right to be treated as a human being after serving his country, and he was ready to fight. Mark Thompson's resolve hardened with each passing day. The water remained shut off. The initial shock had given way to a relentless, gnawing urgency that clawed at his sanity. His wife, Sarah, swollen with the weight of their unborn child, struggled without even the simplest access to running water. The toddler, small and fragile, required constant care. Diapers changed, bottles cleaned, baths to soothe scraped knees and restless nights. Every chore became a battle, every minute without water a reminder of how deeply the city council's cruelty had pierced their lives. The calls to the city council were met with an impenetrable wall of cold, impersonal bureaucracy. Automated responses, evasive frontline clerks, and clipped messages from officials who seemed to hide behind policy jargon. No empathy, no acknowledgement of his service, no hint of flexibility. The council's mantra was unyielding. Rules were rules. Mark's heartfelt pleas for understanding were dismissed as irrelevant exceptions in the face of municipal regulations. The offices that should have been gateways to assistance were instead fortresses of indifference. But the wound was not merely practical. It was moral. Mark's frustration fermented into something darker, righteous fury. Every minute without water was a stark symbol of a systemic failure to honor those who had sacrificed most. It wasn't about the water alone anymore. It was about respect denied, about a society that touted support for veterans but practiced cold neglect. The community had begun to notice. Whispers spread through local coffee shops, veterans groups, and neighborhood gatherings. Mark became more than a man denied water. He was an emblem of a deeper injustice, the embodiment of how bureaucracy could strip dignity from even the most deserving. Support came from unexpected corners. Fellow veterans, neighbors, and advocates who had long suspected that the city's policies disproportionately hurt those least able to fight back rallied quietly behind him. The story of Mark's cutoff transcended personal hardship and ignited a spark of collective outrage. Social media posts, local news inquiries, and word of mouth fueled a swelling undercurrent of support. The city council, wrapped in its self-righteous certainty, remained deaf to the growing chorus. Desperation bred ingenuity. Mark reached out to Jake Ellis, an old Army comrade whose engineering expertise was renowned in both military and civilian circles. Jake, now with the Army Corps of Engineers, carried the same uncompromising sense of justice as Mark. The two shared a bond forged in hardship and discipline, and Jake understood the stakes, not just technically, but ethically. He was appalled by the city's blatant disregard and vowed to help restore not just water, but Mark's dignity. Together, they crafted a plan that was as bold as it was defiant. If the city would not reinstate the water line through official channels, they would take matters into their own hands. Using Jake's insider knowledge of municipal infrastructure and the military's engineering resources, they would tap directly into the city's main water supply. It was an act bordering on rebellion, circumventing official procedures, bypassing cutoffs, challenging the very authority of the council. But it was also a statement: disrespect a veteran, and there will be consequences. The plan required precision and discretion. They had to avoid detection, ensure the safety of the installation, and navigate complex water pressure systems. But more than anything, the operation was symbolic, a reclaiming of power from faceless bureaucracy, and a clear message that those who had served would not be cast aside without a fight. Mark's heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and defiance. This was no longer just about survival. It was a stand against a system that had betrayed its own. The city's silence, their calculated cruelty, had provoked a response they could not ignore. The battle lines were drawn, not with guns or fists, but with pipes and determination. And Mark was ready to see it through, for his family, for the community, for the honor that had been stolen from him. The night was cloaked in shadows, the air thick with tension yet charged with purpose. Jake Ellis and his team moved silently, the weight of their mission pressing down with the gravity of years of disciplined service. They carried not weapons, but tools calibrated to perfection: Army-grade valves, industrial-grade pipes, and high-pressure fittings designed for the toughest environments. Every step was measured, every movement deliberate. This was not a simple repair, but a surgical strike against bureaucratic injustice. They approached Mark Thompson's property with the precision of seasoned engineers and soldiers alike. The city's main water supply, a vast network of underground arteries, pulsed with unseen life beneath their feet. To tap into it required more than technical skill. It demanded strategic insight, flawless execution, and a resolve hardened by the bitter taste of betrayal. Jake's knowledge of municipal infrastructure was unparalleled. He directed his team with calm authority, bypassing the official cutoff valve that had severed Mark's lifeline. Minutes stretched into an intense silence, broken only by the subtle hiss of valves and the metallic click of fittings locking into place. The Army engineers worked swiftly, melding their expertise with military discipline. The connection was flawless, a seamless conduit that restored water flow directly from the city's source to Mark's taps. It was more than a repair. It was a reclamation of dignity and justice. When Mark turned on the faucet that night, water surged forth with an almost symbolic force. Cold, clear, life-giving. It filled the empty vessels, cascaded into basins, and revived a household pushed to its limits by neglect. But the act was only the beginning. Days later, the city council found themselves confronting an unexpected document, a detailed invoice from the Army Corps of Engineers. It itemized every component: the pipes, valves, labor hours, and the use of specialized military-grade equipment required to restore the water supply that the city had unjustly severed. The charge was unapologetically stern, a financial reckoning that underscored the city's failure. The bill was a stark reminder that neglecting those who served carried consequences beyond public relations. It hit the city's coffers where it hurt. Public reaction was immediate and fierce. Local news stations seized the story, framing it as a David versus Goliath clash between an unyielding bureaucratic machine and the determined spirit of a veteran fighting for his family's survival. Editorials decried the city council's cold indifference, painting Mayor Linda Greer as the embodiment of systemic neglect. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting Mark, flooding city officials' inboxes with demands for accountability and change. Under the weight of public pressure, Mayor Greer convened an emergency press conference. Her apology was measured yet unmistakable, a rare admission of fault from a political figure accustomed to deflection. She promised reforms to ensure that no veteran or vulnerable resident would ever suffer such treatment again. Policies would be revisited, oversight committees established, and exceptions created for those who had borne the nation's burdens. The promises were met with cautious optimism, but for many, the victory was in the fact that the fight had forced transparency and acknowledgement. Mark Thompson's story transcended the boundaries of a single household. It became a symbol, a testament to the power of courage, solidarity, and the refusal to accept injustice quietly. Veterans groups across the region rallied around his cause, using the victory as a blueprint for advocacy. Community leaders spoke openly about the need for vigilance against systemic failures that hid behind red tape. In the end, justice had not only been restored, it had been delivered with the cold precision of those trained to serve and protect, wielding the tools of their craft against an indifferent system. Mark's triumph was more than personal. It was a powerful message etched in the fabric of the community. To disrespect a veteran was to ignite a reckoning that no bureaucracy could silence. The water flowed again, but so did the unyielding spirit of a man who refused to be broken.